Ajit, the stocks that belong to banks in India have taken a hammering today. Is this a one-time knockoff fluke thing, or is there clouds on the horizon, as in, dark, bad news clouds? Why is this happening?
Well, one of the things is that the Reserve Bank of India was expected to announce some SOPs for the banking industry. Apparently, this has not happened, which is why the banking sector shares have taken a hammering today. But apart from that, overall there is bad news for the banking industry in India. One of the biggest side effects of demonetization, Mr. Jaitley, the finance minister, might not agree with me on this, but unfortunately bank union leaders like Dilip Chauhan and others whom I've talked to are very clear that the banking industry is in for not one but two crises. The first crisis that they're facing right now is that there's too much of liquidity in banks. Too much of money has gone into banks, especially into savings accounts. Indian banks, unlike European banks and American banks, give a certain amount of interest to people who deposit money even in a savings bank account. Some banks, like Yes Bank and your Kotak Mahindra Bank, they give up to 6%, Bandhan Bank, these are small banks. Public sector banks give from anything from 3.5% to 4% interest on a savings bank account where you keep liquid money. Now, what happens now is that banks are going to find it hard to meet this commitment, because it means that for idle funds lying in a bank, the bank is having to pay interest. And the idle funds, the size and quantum of that idle fund has suddenly gone up.
Yes.
Okay. So the interest burden on banks has gone up. Demonetization has led to a slowdown in the economy, which hopefully Mr. Jaitley is not going to deny, and I don't think he has denied at any stage that there's been a temporary slowdown. Now, temporary or permanent, that's not the issue. The issue here is that since there's a slowdown in the economy, people are not borrowing money from banks to do business or to expand their business. Because people generally borrow money from banks when they have a plan to pay back the money, unless they are people who are willful defaulters or swindlers or frauds. Okay, so genuine business borrows money. They know they have to pay a certain amount of interest, and banks earn interest from that, profit from that interest that they get.
Right.
That's what Indian banking is all about, as opposed to Islamic banking, which is about not taking interest but taking a share of the profit of the project they finance. So basically here we have the situation where banking industry is facing not one but two crises. One, they are overloaded with funds. The second crisis is that apart from being overloaded, they are having to deal with an issue of paying interest, so they will have to reduce the amount of interest they pay on savings bank accounts. Maybe they'll have to reduce the interest they pay on fixed deposits also, because the number of fixed deposits have increased. Now, the third crisis that's going to come is coming in the next financial year, and that crisis is very simple. People are going to see a rise in non-performing assets, or NPAs, or bad loans as you call them, because of the economic slowdown.
Okay.
Now the banking sector has been caught with its pants down literally, and the banking sector is going to be in deep shit in the year 2017. It's a bad year for banks.
Well, you mentioned the government is supposed to give a few SOPs. Have they indicated what they're going to do? And are these real fixes, or are these just life support?
I feel that the government is not doing anything right now for banks, not even life support, not even knee-jerk reaction, not even anything. I have a feeling that the government is waiting for the crisis to come, and when the crisis comes, then they'll probably look at it and see how they can address it.
Okay, so basically
But in the end, I just hope they take into account the fact that we have a certain thing called a poor middle class in this country which doesn't earn much money.
Yeah.
You are taxing it on one hand. It's the only class that is paying income tax.
Right.
On the other hand, you are going to screw up the banking system, and you mess up the banking system on which the middle class relies heavily and the business class relies heavily. Then in the end of the day, you'll mess up the entire business infrastructure of the country, small or big. As for the biggies like the Tatas and the Birlas or whatever, they have their own finance companies.
Right.
So they have access to as much money as they want, and they can raise it through shares and bonds and debentures and what have you.
Right.
Okay, people like that don't have to bother about going to banks. It's somebody who's the startups. You're talking about Make in India on one hand, you're talking about startups on one hand, and on one hand you're messing around with the banking sector. All your MSME industries for which Mr. Jaitley has given SOPs in this budget depend on banks. Now, if banks get messed up and if NPAs rise, the next day you're going to turn around on the banks and say, you are too many NPAs, you guys are not managing the work properly.
Yeah, that makes
The
sense.
problem is that the banks are trying to manage their work, but you have to give them a level playing field to manage themselves also.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Ajit, thanks for explaining it. We'll keep our fingers crossed and give you an update tomorrow if the stocks perform or put in another bad day.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.